welcome everyone. And what you see before you is a photograph of Billie Holiday, taken in New York City in 1949 by the iconic American photographer Herman Leonard. Um, Herman Leonard had a wonderful conversation at Jazz at Lincoln Center in the early part of the 20th century, 21st century, excuse me, in which he talked about this poem, talked about this image. And for him, he didn't realize until after he had taken this photograph that there was an angel behind Billie Holiday. And the all the ubiquitous smoke of those jazz clubs in New York City. This city once had hundreds and hundreds of jazz clubs. I think we're down to a handful, and in some ways that's quite telling of just how fleeting things can be. And Billie Holiday didn't set out to be a singer, but she became a singer and a wonderful blues singer out of necessity. As she writes in her autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues, they were going to throw me out on my ear, but I kept begging for the job. Finally, the piano player took pity on me. He squashed out his cigarette, looked up at me, and said, "Girl, can you sing?" I said, "Sure, I can sing. What good is that?" I had been I had been singing all my life, but I enjoyed it too much to think I could make any real money at it. A lot of great ideas emerged from this particular quotation, and one of them is the very fundamental question of what does it mean to sing? And along the way here, playing around with the notion of song, we will also wrestle with what the American art critic Dave Hickey has pointed out about songs in general. As Dave Hickey wrote, all songs are sad songs, born as they are on the insubstantial substance of our fleeting breath. And here's quite another image from Herman Leonard. Billie Holiday, Hollywood Bowl, Los Angeles, 1953. A quick note on this title and on the title of the previous photograph. For Herman Leonard, the most important thing to do when one was taking a photograph was to name the place and to name the year. And in the poems we will discuss for this lunch hour, we will see the importance of the specific geographical place and the time. Because art, to some degree, is about ways in which we attempt to hold time, to preserve something that is quite fleeting. And here is Billie Holiday in her signature white dress, and along with her singing, she wore gardenias. That was her flower. And in the poems for today, one by Rita Dove called Canary, and the other by Frank O'Hara called The Day Lady Died. We have two poets who use music and specifically the notion of Billie Holiday as a way of considering how do we create meaning, and through the creation of meaning, how do we give meaning to our lives? Rita Dove was born in Akron, Ohio, in 1952, and she is still around doing a lot of great work. The poem we have before us is titled Canary, and is from her 1989 collection of poems called Grace Notes. And what's quite interesting about this poem and about that particular collection, Grace Notes, is that the poem before us, and that collection in general, fall in between two of her highly renowned works. The first being Thomas and Beulah from 1986, which won the Pulitzer Prize. It's a verse novel, as she calls it, and it honors her grandparents. It's a it's a beautiful family handbook, scrapbook album of poetry. And in 1999, um, Rita Dove published On the Bus with Rosa Parks, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. She's a highly decorated poet who reminds us of the true task of poetry, which is attentiveness, along with inventiveness. So this poem is called Canary, and it's for Michael S. Harper, who was a jazz drummer and a poet. So, along your reading, I encourage you to look up Michael S. Harper as well. Canary. Billie Holiday's burned voice had as many shadows as lights, a mournful candelabra against a sleek piano, the gardenia her signature under that ruined face. Now you're cooking, drummer to bass, magic spoon, magic needle. Take all day if you have to with your mirror and your bracelet of song. Fact is, the invention of women under siege has been to sharpen love in the service of myth. If you can't be free, be a mystery. There is a great deal in this poem, and one thing Rita Dove is doing exquisitely well is capturing the the transitory nature or the fleeting nature of song itself. Um, that one line that stands out is in that second stanza, your bracelet of song. As if a song is something you might wear for a moment before moving on to something else. And even as a performer, Billie Holiday um, was a master of the microphone, and the microphone changed the way in which the jazz cabaret developed. In particular, Billie Holiday was known for walking through the tables, amongst the tables, and creating a sense of intimacy for her audiences. While that, however, that intimacy was only a perception. She was a very guarded person, but that sort of illusion of being available helped drive her music. And Rita Dove as well does great job playing with light here. Um, her voice is described. Billie Holiday's voice is described as burned, um, having as many shadows as lights, a mournful candelabra against a sleek piano. These opposites that are always at play here create a tension in the poem that and then these tensions are resolved at the very end. Um, if you can't be free, be a mystery. And one might say, um, where's the freedom in that? But if you think about the idea of being an artist, as is the case of Billie Holiday, her privacy was a thing she cared so much about. And really in the nature of Billie Holiday's life, the overall scope of it, she was hounded by newspapers, and her idea of privacy was something that really did not exist for her, even though she longed for it. And just one final thing about this beautiful poem is that third stanza. Fact is, the invention of women under siege has been to sharpen love in the service of myth. And invention is a very telling word here. And particularly if we take the invention of women under siege and we can go back to the very beginning of Western literature here, and particularly thinking about the Iliad. Um, and in the Iliad, we all are very familiar with the Trojan horse. Now, if we were to look at that from the point of view of of the great Roman poet Ovid, we will notice that that Trojan horse is called an invention or a type of engine that is able to use a mask to arrive somewhere else. And the fact that I'm not sure if Rita Dove intended this, but I find it very intriguing that you have invention and siege being put together on the same line. And then when you're under siege, the invention of women has been to sharpen love in the service of myth. And that word itself rests very heavily on that line, the myth. One might go back to Adrienne Rich's Diving into the Wreck, where she attempts to kind of excavate the myths and to determine a type of truth, one might say. But what we have here, in a nutshell, is Rita Dove creating a poem called Canary, in which the singer is finding a type of freedom through song. And so that very important question at the beginning here, the piano player asking Billie Holiday, "Girl, can you sing?" And Billie Holiday's response was, "Sure, I can sing. What good is that?" Well, one good is that you preserve a bit of yourself. Okay, let's turn to Frank O'Hara. Frank O'Hara, in this poem, "The Day Lady Died," broke a lot of the rules of poetry, which is great. And these rules are meant to be explored, pushed against, and Frank O'Hara was a one might say the leading member of what was called the New York School, and this collection of poets were very much in conversation with abstract expressionists of the time, and the overall goal of these poets was to really try to merge the idea of multiple perspectives in a single frame. And this poem was first published in 1959, and it was collected a few years later in a collection called Lunch Poems, that was published in 1965. Frank O'Hara was born in Baltimore, which is also where Billie Holiday was born. But early childhood, he moved to Massachusetts, and he was a very serious music student. Frank O'Hara's early aspirations in life was to become a concert pianist. It didn't work out that way. He had a stint in the Navy, U.S. Navy, after which he entered school. He entered Harvard as a music major, then switched to English literature with the idea of becoming a writer. Frank O'Hara's life is a short one. He was born in 1926, and he passed away in 1966. But in the time he had, he made a very noteworthy contributions to modern American poetry. And in this poem, we have from this is a poem Frank O'Hara would have written on his lunch break. And as we kind of go through this, you will note that this poem is somewhat disjointed. It O'Hara himself is trying to capture the frenetic energy of walking the streets of New York in 1959, which is not unlike walking the streets of New York almost at any time. Um, and he's very busy going about his day here. And this is filled with timestamps overall. And we think back to the Herman Leonard photography that opened this conversation. Um, like art itself is attempting to preserve to document, to chronicle, to hold. And I'll let this poem speak for itself here. The day Lady died. It is 12:20 in New York, a Friday, 3 days after Bastille Day. Yes, it is 1959, and I go get a shoe shine because I will get off the 419 in East Hampton at 7:15 and then go straight to dinner, and I don't know the people who will feed me. I walk up the muggy street beginning to sun and have a hamburger and a malted and buy an ugly New World Writing to see what the poets in Ghana are doing these days. I go to the bank and Miss Stillwagon, first name Linda, I once heard, doesn't look up my balance for once in her life. And in the Golden Griffin, I get a Verlaine for Patsy with drawings by Bernard, although I do think of Hesiod, translated Richard Lattimore, or Brendan Behan's new play, or Le Bacon, or Le Nerc's of Genet, but I don't. I stick with Verlaine after practically going to sleep with quandariness. And for Mike, I just stroll into the Park Lane liquor store and ask for a bottle of Strega, and then I go back where I came from to 6th Avenue and the tobacconist in the Ziegfeld Theater and casually ask for a carton of Gauloises and a carton of Picayunes and a New York Post with her face on it. And I am sweating a lot by now and thinking of leaning on the John door in the 5 spot while she whispered a song along the keyboard to Mal Waldron, and everyone and I stopped breathing. Often poetry is the art of the line, but also too punctuation matters. And here there isn't a full stop, which seems to be about right. If one is getting ready for a weekend in the Hamptons, and it's a Friday in New York, just afternoon, you've got a lot of things to do before you get ready. And so, in that sense, this poem captures a lot of the energy of New York. It also is an elegy, but it's a very unique elegy. It is an elegy for a city that is now past. If we were to walk the steps that Frank O'Hara took that day, we would see a different New York. Also, as well, early writers of poets are taught that that popular culture should not be part of poetry. O'Hara um, um, really dismisses that comment. Everything is poetry. One might go so far as to say what we lend our attention to can become poetic. And so, in the cadence of New York, as this poem works its way, we have these common everyday activities that are happening, the things someone might do on a lunch break. You've got that 1 hour. You've got people you're going to go see. You can't show up at their homes without gifts, and so that's where we are. It is 3 days after Bastille Day, so this is pretty thick summer in New York. We can imagine how muggy the streets are, and even in 1959, the streets in New York were muggy. And a hamburger and a malted, quick lunch, and we kind of see this cultural explosion happening here in terms of Frank O'Hara's engagement with creative activity around the world. But the beauty of this poem is that O'Hara creates so much, one might say, cacophony, this swirl of activity, until he sees a cover of the New York Post. And this may have been the afternoon printing of the Post, where we once lived in a city where You could have papers. There was an evening news and a morning news. Um, and in this and in this very rich print culture, out of everything he's buying for his friends, a New York Post with her face on it that brings him into this moment of stillness. And I'm sweating a lot by now and thinking of leaning on the John door in the 5 spot while she whispered a song along the keyboard to Mal Waldron, and everyone and I stopped breathing. And that ending itself, quite literally, is breathtaking. Um, and going back to Dave Hickey's comment or observation that all songs are sad songs, born as they are on the insubstantial substance of our fleeting breath. And with this poem, we see that idea playing out. That for a singer, um, a song is the thing itself. It is that element that testifies to one's humanity. And it really is that song that, to some degree, we each seek in terms of finding meaning and finding an approach to the world that works for us.